Don't mess with me, pork chop. What day is this?
It's February 2nd. Groundhog Day.
You know, I thought it was yesterday.
Oh.
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes, and you know, it has been an interesting week. We've talked a lot about comic news. We've done a couple of comic book reviews, but there were two comic books that needed some special TLC, some special attention just because of how awful they were. And shockingly, they're from the same writer, Brian Michael Bendis. I don't like to talk about all of his bad comics on the channel because, you know, that's a lot of content. But this week, you know, Action Comics 1021 and Legion of Superheroes #5 they were extra special as far as their awfulness. And here to talk with me about it is Perch. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. People are probably surprised a little bit. I don't talk negative comics too much, but you're right. These two are a struggle to get through.
Yeah, so we'll talk about Action first. It's the combination of the writing and the art. The art by John Romita Jr. I just was reading like his Captain America Trapped in Dimension X story, with Rick Remender, John Romita Jr. on there. The art's pretty good. It's not my favorite style, but it's noticeably better than what we're getting here. And maybe I don't think he gets excited for DC Comics.
It's tough. I mean, so I love John Romita Jr. I do. And I say that because I have extremely fond memories of his X-Men run, Uncanny back, the late 100s and the start of the Mutant Massacre. And he did some amazing books for Marvel way back in the day. And I mean, in many cases, he's solidified in my mind as one of the top level X-Men artists. And he's adopted his style. It's definitely gotten more scratchy over the years. We've seen that when he inks his own work, I think it's not as good. I understand the financials behind why you do that, but it's not as good. And then his move to DC, I haven't seen him just knock a book out of the park. His work with Frank Miller was not bad. It's still not my favorite, but his run right now on Superman with Bendis, or on Action Comics, I should say, it's painful because this is a guy I do legitimately like, and I just can't get into it.
There was one issue of Batman that he did with Tom King where the opening of the story is outside and it's all rainy.
Yep, that's right.
And that one looked pretty good until they went inside.
Yeah, and his Batman with Scott Snyder, when it was the I forget there was a subset of his Batman book, and he did a couple issues. The Two-Face was the villain. I should remember that, but that was good as well. I mean, it's solid. It's not still not as great as those early X-Men issues for me, and some of the stuff he did. I like the Remender Dimension Z work, but this Action Comics run is just it's like I say, it feels uninspired. I have no idea what he's thinking, and and what's truly going on. But it feels like an artist who's doing a book he doesn't really want to do.
Well, and can you blame him? He does have to read these scripts. I mean, I'm sure getting through them is a pain, and getting motivated to actually draw this story has got to be a lot of work because reading it's not fun. There's nothing fun about this Action Comics issue.
It's not. I asked this question legitimately. I mean, there's going to be some people definitely who love Bendis. And by the way, if you like Bendis's work, more power to you. I don't think you're bad for that, or you're dumb, or you're a worse reader, or anything like that. I mean, if you like Bendis's style and his style appeals to a certain amount of people, then awesome. You've got a comic that works for you. For me, if I was an artist and I was working on his book, I would be uninspired because I know half of my art's going to get covered up with word balloons anyway. And nobody's going to see it. So, I mean, that's not an enthusiasm to spend days or weeks on a comic when most of it's going to go to waste.
So it's been really weird. In Bendis's Action Comics, it's not really a Superman story. It's not really a Superman story. It's more like Superman and all of Bendis's new characters that he's created. So you've got Leviathan, you've got Red Cloud, you've got all of his new characters from Young Justice in this issue.
Mm-hmm.
And none of them have been very well realized, and it makes for a very not a great read. And then the story is really confusing. I still don't know what happened with Red Cloud.
Yeah, it's I think to me it feels like this. Bendis spent many years at Marvel building up some characters like Jessica Jones and others. And it took a long time for these characters to go from kind of their own title in the background to starting to appear in the Avengers to taking more of a center stage. And it was built. Some of those worked, some of those didn't. Miles Morales was slowly built up in Ultimate Spider-Man. And then what we've got here is it's like Bendis is impatient to just get to the toys he wants to play with. Sort of like Riri Williams came into the scene with Iron Man. So he introduced these characters, but rather than giving them the big buildup, it's like, nope, they're the most important characters now. They're the center stage. They're the biggest villains that Superman will ever have. It's this character who was introduced 12 months ago. He's moving these things rapidly from idea to the core of the character, and the fans are not keeping up with that. I mean, some of these characters are, like you say, they're just half-baked.
And it's kind of laughable because, in Justice League, this Justice Doom War, we built up this like Apex Lex and his super, Legion of Doom that he has. And here they're completely subservient to Leviathan. He's running things, but then they also acknowledge that Red Cloud is more powerful and the only one among them that can kill Superman, even though they're all powered up because of the gifts that they got.
Well, sure, and that character is not showing up in Justice League when we're dealing this. I don't know if they'll show up in Death Metal or not, but it's and so I say, if you're a person on DC, and I know some of the creators listen to your stream and listen to us talk, and then they object. I will say, from a fan perspective, here's how it's coming across. You have a core story. It's what Snyder did in Justice League around the Justice Doom War and Perpetua and all of that kind of stuff. And they're following along. Whether they like it or not, they're following along and they're along for that ride. And then suddenly you've got this comic over here that's saying, hey, these are the actual true bad guys over here. It's Leviathan. That's even more impressive and more villainous than Luthor, bigger and more powerful. And then a couple issues later, it's like, oh, and by the way, there's somebody who's even more evil than Leviathan, and it's Red Cloud, and she's not only the most powerful one who could kill Superman, she should also be leading everything. And the fans are going, like, what are we supposed to be following here? This doesn't make sense. And it comes across, whether you realize it or not, it's coming across like the creators are not talking to each other, not coordinating, and each one is kind of trying to tell their own story and almost passively aggressively attacking the other creator's story. Because if you read Action Comics, it in a very backhanded way rejects a lot of the things that Snyder was doing over in Justice League. And that it does not, whether you like Bendis' view or you like Snyder's view, whichever one you like, that's not helpful to a cohesive story.
Yeah, and then by the end, you realize that this issue actually takes place in like December, because
Right.
It leads into Superman, the Superman issue in December where he reveals his identity, and you're like, and it's kind of like before the end of Justice Doom War, so it's really confusing because you don't realize the time that you're in when you're reading it. And like I said, what happened with Red Cloud? Did she all of a sudden turn good and just decided not to kill Superman?
She's been a conflicted character, but it's like Bendis has a big story in his mind, but he hasn't put it all onto the paper. Maybe he's impatient, or maybe he's just not putting it all out there. So he's kind of asking the readers to keep up with what's in his mind, but he hasn't explained it all. And this idea that this is all kind of happening in the past almost doubles down further on. As a reader, you have a choice. Your choice is, because you've already seen the ending to this story. That's how Justice League Snyder's run ended, and what sets up Death Metal. So you've seen how it ends. So your choice is either everything Bendis is telling you in this story really doesn't matter, because we've already seen the ending. There, Red Cloud and Leviathan don't really factor in there at all. So, does this matter? This is a side quest to the big story. Or you have to sign up for the idea that the big story they're leading to in Death Metal is irrelevant, and this is the actual true important one. This is unhelpful, and it's not a good comic, and it's not a good way to sell things. When I say not a good comic, not a good comic for me. Again, if you enjoyed this, good for you. I really appreciate that, and that's awesome. But for me, it's a confusing mess.
And it's the same thing with Leviathan. He reads like a completely different character when he talks right now from what was introduced in the event series. And all of a sudden he doesn't want to kill the Justice League. He needs them.
It feels like a bunch of this stuff is just not, the dots aren't getting connected. That's the problem here. And I don't know, If it makes sense to the writer, it's not making sense to the readers. And some it does. Some people are like, I'm following along just fine. Cool, good for you. But generally speaking, what I hear in and out is that there's a couple missing parts, and people are like, well, maybe Bendis is going to fill in those parts at some point, and that's the 18th issue in this big storyline. Who knows? What are we doing here? But it doesn't make much sense, and more importantly, this is not doing his new characters any favors. When you come out and you say, hey, Red Cloud is actually the most important one, by Luthor, who's been Superman's arch nemesis for, I don't know, I mean, how many decades now? Many decades. Almost every reader rejects that. No reader goes like, oh wow, she must be really impressive. That this is definitely a big villain. They just think this is a cheap con, because you wouldn't have a character in 12 months suddenly be more powerful than Brainiac or Luthor or Doomsday or any of these big characters. You can't just tell readers that somebody is bad. You have to show them.
Yeah. So let's move on to the from the comic book that's not really connecting to the dots to the comic book that might be connecting too many dots.
Yes.
Legion of Superheroes is a better comic book. The art is better. I think the story is actually more coherent than Action Comics this week. But I enjoyed reading it less because it's just, I've never seen so much dialogue in a comic book, and I've read a lot of Brian Michael Bendis comic book issues. You've seen the Matrix trilogy, right?
Oh yeah.
So in the second one, which I believe is Matrix Reloaded, that movie is it's actually enjoyable. It's kind of nonsensical, but it's enjoyable. But I remember hating it when I left the theater because at the very end, that dude in the room just talks for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And it's monotone. It's completely boring. There's so much information in there. It's actually hard to take it. And that is exactly what it's like reading this comic book issue. You're getting so much information from Computo and Brainiac 5, and you can't distinguish their voices. They sound like the exact same character, even though one of them's a living person and one of them I think is a computer construct. And it's just information upon information. It's information for days in these pages. Yeah,
it's funny because I think these two issues really highlight Bendis's weakness. And every writer has strengths and weaknesses, and Bendis has many strengths. He's very imaginative, creates big arcs and big storylines, and he does create interesting characters when he can. And he's I mean, what he did for Luke Cage was legendary for sure. I mean, he brought some real prominence to that character, and that was great. But these are his two weaknesses. And in Legion of Superheroes, there is a good idea and a good story in there, but it is a wall of text. And as a reader, it's extremely hard to just want to trudge through that. And it feels like it's taking you actual work to try and ascertain what is really not that complex of a plot. I mean, the idea that Superman is not really Superman. It's, John will be the true Superman. A spoiler, sorry. But there's a lot of, but I say that in tongue in cheek because this isn't actually going to stick. I mean, nobody believes that suddenly DC Comics for the next 20 years or so is going to be like, well, this is not really Superman. It's not going to happen. But it is a chore to read through, and comics shouldn't feel like you have to work that hard to get to pretty small amounts of information. And it's that same, you could have shown this. And if you're the artist, and the art was much better in that book, I agree. What is your motivation for doing amazing pages and panels and great scenes when you know that you've got a bunch of characters just standing around talking to each other for like 10 pages? It's tough.
So it is an interesting issue. It actually sets up like the origin of the Legion of Superheroes and why they needed John Kent to be a part of them. I don't know that I buy it, but okay. It also it's basically tying into Generation 5 and what that event is going to lead into. It's talking about what is going to happen if that's not fixed. That's clearly in this. So I do like the connective tissue to something that's going to be happening in the future, even though this is happening, 10 millennia in the future, 10,000 years. But it's really hard to read. And the characterization of all the Legionnaires, they're just interchangeable characters as far as dialogue. The one scene where the invisible kid or invisible lad, whatever you want to call him, he like shows up and says, you're always talking and he just says some whatever obtuse line and then disappears and leaves again. Never, like he was never there. That feels like every other character.
Yeah.
They weren't there the whole time and they said something and then they left.
And that's been the problem So if you look at Legion of Superheroes back for the last 30 years or so, the great runs find a way to make every character unique, that they have a unique voice and a unique strength and a unique reason to be on this team, that there is something that they bring to Legion of Superheroes that others don't have. And the bad runs have been the ones where it's just random faces in suits and they show up and you could just interchange them. And unfortunately, that's what we have here. We have a big cast, and we have a writer who likes to write dialogue in his own style and kind of ignore the character's own voice. And so if you take this issue and you just move around the word bubbles to everybody, just mix them entirely, it will read the same. It doesn't matter. And that's terrible. I mean, these characters have a great history and a great personalities on their own right, but they've all been just homogenized into one voice. And that makes it a chore to read through. Some have said, oh, it's intellectuals who like this comic. Maybe. I mean, you have to think that, like you, I think that there were some pretty cool things in this, setting up Generation 5, setting up what could happen to time. There's a thread in there, everything else. It's just, and this is going to sound weird, this is a comic that could have used some decompression and actually been stretched out to, say, 3 issues and interspersed these big talking walls with, I don't know, some plot, some action, something going on. So it wasn't just, hey, buckle up and here's a bunch of information just dumped on you.
Yeah, it makes for a poor reading experience. And people will probably say, well, Wes, you just like bag on Brian Michael Bendis. Well, no, I like to bag on bad writing, but this is the worst time in the world. I don't want bad comics to be coming out right now. I want the best comics in the world to be coming out right now to keep people coming back, even though maybe these stories are only going to be available on digital or whatever. I don't want to be talking about how epically bad these 2 comics are, but I felt like we kind of needed to, because they were really bad.
They were. And please, for readers or listeners who are here, I mean, this isn't a roast of those 2 comics. It's not poking fun at them. We're trying to point out the specific flaws. I think Bendis absolutely has a place in the industry. I think he can do things, but this is, in both cases, he's missing the mark. So if I was his editor and I was talking to him, what I would say is, on Superman, you've created some of these new characters, you've introduced some of these new threats, but you're not connecting to Superman's past. So you're forcing readers to just forget a lot of what they've known about Superman and adopt your vision. And that's wrong. You shouldn't be dragging them to that. And on Legion of Superheroes, you've got to find the unique voice for these characters, and you've got to have the issues stop being a info dump. The issue where they brought Damian in, even though I don't like Bendis's dialogue, the way he writes characters, but the issue where Damian showed up, there was at least some movement going on in that issue. And maybe you get the feeling is Damian the horrible villain of the future, and Jonathan Kent the heroic hero of the future, and there's going to be 2 arch enemies pitted against. That's an interesting concept. Okay, let's play with that. But you can't do these issues where it's like, we're going to move the plot along by just talking at you for pages and pages and pages. I would guess most readers reading that just didn't even catch most of the details that were going on because they were bored.
Yeah, it was actually tough to get through, like I said, but I made sure to get through it because I knew we were gonna discuss it a little bit because of the true Superman reveal that was in there, and we'd already talked about Action Comics. So Perch, I really appreciate you coming on here and talking about these 2 comic books. Is there anything else that you needed to get out before we wrap this up?
No, I just please make better comics. And if you I'll say again, if you like these comics, I'm legitimately happy for you. Great. Let's comics can be for everyone. Everybody has their own thing, but they're tough to get through. Just tough to get through.
I feel your pain, but hopefully people will read or watch the video and understand that these are legitimate critiques. This wasn't a roast. Like I do roast some comics, but something's got to change.
They do, yeah. Legion of Superheroes is headed for a bad place. If this is going to continue, there's no way the title will be able to continue like this, and then we'll be rebooting it in 12 months.
All right, buddy. Hopefully next time we come on, it'll be for better circumstances.
Absolutely. Good talking with you.
If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. I would appreciate it very much. It helps us attract more views for the channel. Subscribe for future commentary, comic book news, and reviews. And don't forget to ring the bell for notifications. If you want to talk comics, movies, and much, much more, you can follow me on Twitter at Wes_from_TC. With that, Salamat Po, And I'm out.